on the way to a hospital. He just starts screaming at me. I knew how to fix the problem, so suddenly the problem was made mine. That client would dog me in and outside of hours, but I allowed it to be my role for a good amount of time. If you're making the decision to hold on to a client because of the cash, you really are in an employment situation again. Today, we're talking about how to professionally fire a consulting client. I want to talk about a model that I like to use. What do you want to happen? What is currently happening? And how much of that is within your control? That freedom feeling is the same feeling you're probably going to feel as the relief washing away when you finally go through the process and exit from that client. And the final thing that you might want to actually consider is, many years ago, I fired a client for the first time, and it was one of the more freeing experiences I ever had in business. Up until that point, I was really an employee, and it wasn't until I actually took that step that I realized what it was to actually have a business that enabled you to select the clients that you want to work with. And so today on the show, I want to talk about what I learned through the experience. What are the considerations that you might want to ask yourself if you're thinking of getting rid of a problem client, and what are the steps that you can do to make sure that you fire a client professionally. My name is Russell Pearson, and this is your Consulting Business Podcast, and on the show we are talking about all things to do with running a consulting business. And so whether it's about firing clients or whether it's about gaining clients in your business, there are episodes to suit all your needs. This is episode number 111 of the Your Consulting Business Podcast, and today we're talking about how to professionally fire a consulting client. And so let me tell you a little story. Let's see how I got to where I got to get to that point to let that client go. Now, the client that I was working with at the time was a very action-packed client. They were always about growth. They were about pushing harder. One of the points that actually made to me early on in the engagement is that they'd already gone through 10 different consultants, and I was just another of a long string that they were looking forward to going through and learning as much as possible, and ideally burning on the way through. Now, I took it on as a bit of a challenge. I thought, no, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be very different to those past consultants, which was potentially an ego thing, and at the end of the day was a bit of a mistake. But what I found is that client would dog me in and outside of hours. They would always point out things that were a problem that had nothing to do with me, and they would actually use me not only as a scapegoat, but they also used me as a sounding board that they could complain to. And so that wasn't my role, but I allowed it to be my role for a good amount of time, which was on me. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So how did I get to this point in time where it got so bad that I fired this client? Well, I'm driving along the road one day on the way to a hospital. Now, I'm going to the hospital because my wife has been there for the last 2 days. She's experiencing these chronic headaches, which they call suicide headaches, and we couldn't work out what was going on. The doctors didn't know what was going on. They put her on oxygen and all sorts of different things. We eventually got to the bottom of it, but at that point, I didn't know, which means that I was in a quite a vulnerable state to react to a situation. But by reacting, I actually learned a lot of things that I didn't realize that I had the opportunity to do. So I'm driving along the road, and this client calls. And this client doesn't ask what's going on in my life. He just starts screaming at me about this website that has gone down. Now, the website going down had nothing to do with me and my consulting. It was just I knew how to fix the problem. So suddenly the problem was made mine. And so he's screaming about how the website's down and why isn't the website up and why aren't I across it and why aren't I fixing it? And I said in that moment, again, remembering that I was at a breaking point already, I said, I don't think that we're able to continue to service you at the level that you would like. And he paused. He said, no, there's nothing wrong with all the other things that you do. It's just this website. And I said, no, sorry, you don't understand. We have come to the end of this relationship because unfortunately we're in a situation where I'm not able to service you at the level that you require. And now that started a conversation that actually went through a process to detach myself from that client engagement. But that one conversation, when I got off that conversation, I felt more free than I had since the day I actually left employment in the first place. I suddenly had this realization that I didn't have to put up with the things that had come along that were there making me money. And ideally, I was thinking that I had to put up with the same sort of stuff that I would put up with in an employment situation. So I guess the first step is that you don't have to put up with any of that stuff. It's not a case of having to leave like you did leave an employee. You can fire a client at any time if they're not meeting your expectations. And so the way I handled it wasn't necessarily the best possible way, but that is the thing that got me to the realization that I can fire a client when I decide, which means that you, as the business owner in your consulting business, can decide when that point of time is. Now, I'm going to take you through a few considerations you might want to consider instead of waiting to the breaking point of just making that happen because there was too much pressure on you. You don't want to get into an emotional state in this scenario. You don't have to. You get to select and choose things and have potentially what are considered as uncomfortable conversations, but are just normal conversations in the world of consulting, to enable you to select the way you want to work in your consulting practice. And so here's 3 considerations you might want to put in place before deciding to fire a client. Now, the first one is, are there any obligations which would put you in risk? There is potentially a contract or at least an agreement. There is probably some form of time in that agreement, which is the exit clause. And so understanding what that exit clause says, go and have a look at it. If you don't have a contract in place, then it's a lot easier sometimes to actually step away from those situations, but don't put yourself in a situation to come up against legal issues that you can avoid. Now, at the same time, do not be scared of being, taken to court. Don't be scared about having to face legal ramifications about something that are your right. There is absolutely no reason why you wouldn't put yourself in the situation sometime to experience some of these legal steps so that you can feel more confident and not be scared of some of these situations. But you do want to see what you've agreed to, because if you want to do this professionally, you want to keep your commitments. And so being sure about the reasons why you're leaving this scenario are an absolute key, and we will talk about those in just a moment as well. Your decision for making this call really shouldn't be monetary. So there may be a feeling that you need to hold on to this job because it's the only thing that's going to be putting food on the table. But if you have a process for getting clients, and that's what we help people do inside the Forge Business community, and how we can actually help people get a select consulting model in place so that they are highly in demand, it enables you to be in a place where you don't feel that need to hold on to cash. If you're making the decision to hold on to a client because of the cash, you really are in an employment situation again. And so having the freedom to select and choose what you want in your world is really the definition that comes down to being an owner in the business. Now, I'm going to talk about the ownership stuff in just a moment, because once you've actually had a look at your obligations, once you understand any contractual agreements, and once you understand your exit clause, the thing I want you to ask yourself is, why are you doing this? So let me just pull over the board, and I want to talk about a model that I like to use called above or below the line. So you may have seen me talk about this before. This is always a good reminder, so stick around. So every single day we get to make decisions about how we're going to act. And in those decisions, we get to decide, are we above or below this line? And so below the line, we find that we can be susceptible to blaming others. All right, so we can blame people. We can make excuses for our situation. Or we can be in denial. And denial is the worst because we're pretending that the actual situation is not happening. And so we've got these 3 different states. We can be blaming people. So the question to ask yourself in this situation where you want to fire the client, and by the way, you get maximum choice. Even if you are below the line, you can still choose to fire the client because choices are ultimately yours. But do consider, am I blaming them for something that really is something that would be in my control? Am I making excuses for the fact that we maybe haven't delivered in the way that they would expect, or around the expectations that we are setting for people? Are we in denial that it's actually not us, it's them, right? And that's part of blame and denial. But let's look above the line. Where can we choose to be? Well, we can choose to be in a place of responsibility. So we can choose to be responsible, which means we have the ability to respond, right? Response able, right? The second step above that is accountable. So we can be accountable for the things that we've done, for the things that we've said, for the situation that we find ourselves in. And so, for instance, I was accountable for allowing the situation to get where it had got because I had allowed it to happen in very small doses until it got to the point where this person's screaming at me down the line without any context whatsoever, without even really realizing that I was on my way to the hospital. So, accountable, responsible, and above that, the ultimate space is to have ownership. So the idea of having ownership is to have ownership over everything that happens for us, to us, but everything that is happening is really we have ownership of, which means that if bad things happen, something that we did in the past or right now was we can have ownership around what that was, which means we have the ability to change and shift it. All right, so are you blaming, making excuses, or in denial? Are you playing below the line, or are you above the line, responsible, accountable, and having ownership about the things that are happening in your world? What I like about this model is that below the line, really, it's talking, the acronym is staying in bed. You know, we're lying down and taking it, right? Above the line, we have a tool that allows us to move forward, which is the or. It allows us to actually continue to move forward. This in itself is just a really useful little mechanism that you can ask about all sorts of things that are happening in your world, whether it be personal or business. But especially when it comes to firing a client, definitely go through the process to ask yourself, am I blaming, am I making excuses or in denial, or am I actually taking ownership, being accountable and responsible? And you can change things. Things can change very, very quickly when you come at them from a different frame. And one of those things is instead of firing the client there and then, you can actually reframe the relationship and restart the relationship. Now, if they're not willing to go along on this restart, that's absolutely fine, and you can let them go or they can leave themselves. On the flip side, just understanding that you have the ability, you have the ownership, the accountability and responsibility to make the change if you want. And then finally, the other consideration when you are above the line is to actually identify specifically what it is about this situation that is not working the way you want. What do you want to happen? What is currently happening? And how much of that is within your control? Ultimately, it's all within your control, but it's about choosing and selecting what is the next step that's going to happen. I'm not suggesting that firing a client is giving up. In fact, it is a really nice way of freeing yourself from a situation that was easier to get away from, potentially a past mistake that you've made about selecting that client in the first place, than trying to spend potentially months, even years, trying to fix a relationship that's just simply not working. But I want you to look at it from a more detached point of view. I want you to look at it by disassociating yourself from the feelings that are happening within that relationship and say, what is actually happening? What is the specific problem that I'm actually not enjoying? And what is it specifically that I want to change? Now, if you can't change that because of of what's going on, then that's absolutely fine. Great reason to step away from it. But ideally, we don't want to be making it about the individual. We want to be making it about the situation, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So we've come to a point in time where we actually want to make the decision. We've decided that we are playing above the line, that we actually are in a space where we can exit from this client, and we technically understand what it is that really is the problem, and it's something that we can't change. Absolutely fantastic. So what is the professional way that we can fire this client? Well, there's 1,000 different ways you can fire a client, and you can be the equivalent of what Trump used to do on the television show and say, you're fired, and just do it that way. Maybe that's a bit of fun. Maybe that's a way you can release all the pent-up feelings that you've been having. But the reality is, the consulting world is a small world. And we don't have to burn relationships, right? We don't have to go about burning things down to the ground because we feel a certain way about them. At the same time, we're not robots, and we actually get to enjoy. We get to select the things that we want to enjoy in our consulting practice. And so what are the professional steps that we can take? Well, number one, we want to be having a conversation with this individual rather than sending them some written notice. The written notice is something that we would do after. So professional conduct, professional communication is conversations are for communication. The emails and written communication is for confirmation. And so we might confirm the exit after the conversation's had. But if we want to do this professionally, we are going to have potentially a difficult conversation. My suggestion in that conversation is it's not about the individual. As soon as you make the conversation about the individual and the things that they have done, you are playing below the line. If you want to play above the line, my suggestion is to actually talk about the situation that is not working. Make it a third party conversation. So we're now both on the same time talking about this third party, which is the situation. And by doing that, potentially we can actually find a way forward, or potentially we can say this is not going to work for both of us in this scenario, so we're going to end the relationship. By making it about the individual, we're actually making it personal. We're actually going out of our way, believe it or not, to say that this person is the reason why this communication or this situation is falling down. And while that might feel good, it doesn't allow us to stay above the line and professional. So if we want to stay professional, if we want to potentially have a good working relationship with this person, even from a third party point of view later on down the track, you never know who whispers in whose ear. There is no reason for us to make the conversation personal. Talk about the situation. Next, we want to think about how much notice we want to give them. Now, there's the obligation notice that might be in a contracting agreement that we've got with somebody, but there's also just what is fair play outside of that. So in other words, if we were to be taken out of the situation and it would hurt the business, then consider what would be an option or at least a compromise so that you can step away from the business without injuring it. Now, if that's the case, I want to also stress that potentially that you're setting up a contractual arrangement with a client instead of a consulting relationship, because you don't want to be a piece in their jigsaw puzzle that can be removed and suddenly break the mechanism. We talked about that in a video just recently, the difference between being a contractor and a consultant. If you're actually a consultant, it shouldn't hurt too much to release you from that contract. It shouldn't be you shouldn't be a linchpin with their business or their situation. And so by removing you, it's going to be a lot easier. But if you find that you have put yourself in a trap, and that's potentially why you're trying to look at exiting the relationship right now, then think about what would be fair and reasonable notice to ensure that you don't damage the situation on the way out. And the final thing that you might want to actually consider is there someone who would value this client more? Funnily, some person's trash is another person's treasure, and I have had some amazing clients off the back of them being an absolute nightmare for other colleagues. And so there may be colleagues that you know or can work with who might be ideal to work with this potentially bad client. And so you've got to look at what is the situation, and if you did look at what specifically is wrong with the situation, you might find that there was a misalignment in some area that you know another colleague might be very aligned to. So by putting people together, that enables the ongoing work that you've been doing to continue without too much interruption. Funnily enough, I've noticed that even in a very good relationship that's coming to an end, we can refer as many people as you like. At the end of the day, the client is going to make their own decisions about them. So don't get too frustrated at that. You might refer someone who is ideal to take the job on, but it will be their choice as to what they do with that recommendation. And so don't get too frustrated about it. I've seen that happen time and time, and I've felt very frustrated myself, even exiting a situation. We've had a very good relationship with a client, but we're at the end of a project. They're wanting me to do something else, and I'm not wanting to do it. And so I've gone and referred someone else in, and it's at the end of the day, it's become one of maybe 3 people that they're looking at. So all you can do is put your best foot forward. But there might be somebody who would be ideal to look after this client where they just haven't been suited to you. And so very much like the day I actually left the engagement where I was employed, I got in my car, I turned the radio on, I opened the windows, and I drove off into the future as my hair was being blown by the breeze, and I felt free. You know, I got the songs playing in the background. It's like exiting from a movie. And that freedom feeling that you probably also experienced when you left the last employment role that you were in is the same feeling you're probably going to feel at the relief washing away when you finally go through the process and exit from that client. But do take the time to professionally consider the situation and say, is there something that I can do to reframe, to correct, to adjust? And if not, what are the steps I'm going to take to ensure that I can keep a strong professional and industrial relationship, not with this individual, but the rest of the world and the industry around me. If you find this valuable, there are all sorts of videos where we talk about all sorts of things that help consultants just like you. So make sure to check out other episodes on the channel, and if there's something specific you're looking for, put your hand up, reach out, send us an email, go to russellpearsonprograms.com, download the updated resource that we've got available there. But if you want to actually send us a question, you can go to russellpearson.com and you can ask me anything there and I can point you in the right direction. There are resources we've got, there's training we've got, there are programs that we've got that may be suited to help you grow your consulting practice. So have you ever experienced a story like mine? You probably have. Right? You probably have had a bad client at some point in time. I'd love to hear from you. Put it in the comments below. What was the situation? What did you experience? What did you do about it? We would love to hear what you got to say. And if you know someone who might find this episode valuable, make sure to share it with them. There are friends and colleagues all around the world who might find that this is very useful in their specific situation. And funnily enough, it's a large way that we actually grow the subscribers on the channel. So we really appreciate your recommendations, and we love it when people subscribe by hitting the button and clicking the bell so they're notified when the next episode is live. My name is Russell Pearson. This has been episode number 111 of the Your Consulting Business podcast. Until next time, stay passionate, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye for now.